Biden insists that the US should continue giving billions in military funding to Israel, no matter what Israel does to Palestinians. This amounts to enabling brutality towards Palestinian civilians. Number 2. Biden attacks the BDS movement with false charges of anti-Semitism. Lack of accountability or consequences from world governments for Israel's violations of Palestinian rights has led to the growth of a civil society alternative, an international human rights campaign known as BDS, which stands for Boycott, Divestment and Sanctions, targeting Israel to end its violations of Palestinian human rights. Biden's platform notes that he rejects the BDS campaign and accuses it of veering into anti-Semitism because it singles out Israel. Of course, this argument is completely preposterous. Because Palestinian rights are being denied by Israel, then by default, any campaign to support Palestinian rights is going to have to target Israel. By the absurd logic of the Biden campaign, either you give Israel a pass for oppressing Palestinians or you're a potential anti-Semite. And especially at this time, when anti-Semitism is a real and rising problem in America. To misuse the charge of anti-Semitism to stifle criticism of Israel or support for Palestinian human rights is a particularly irresponsible and dangerous thing to do. Number 3. The Biden campaign engages in victim blaming. Another reason the Biden campaign outlines opposition to BDS is because it, quote, lets Palestinians off the hook for their choices. This amounts to victim blaming by ignoring the huge disparity in power between Israel and the Palestinians and assigning to the Palestinians responsibility for finding themselves under the boot of Israeli occupation and apartheid. Just think of a campaign to stop violence against women. Can you imagine any political figure, let alone a self-described progressive one, objecting to such a campaign on the grounds that it lets abused women off the hook for inviting or deserving the situations they find themselves in? We've seen this before with regressive commentators who look at the stark inequality in America and blame the poor for supposedly being lazy, or who blame minorities themselves for the inequalities of the criminal justice system. And that's precisely what Biden is saying to the Palestinian victims of Israeli occupation and apartheid, while insisting on arming the oppressors to the tune of $4 billion in taxpayer-funded military aid every year. In what way does this callous and harmful attitude reflect our values?